The email arrived at 6:23 on a Monday morning. I know the exact time because I was already awake. I've been waking up at 5:30 for the past 19 years old, habit from my father, who used to say that the first hour of the day belongs to you, and every hour after that belongs to somebody else. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the sun come up over the backyard, thinking about nothing in particular, just the quiet, just the light. Then my phone buzzed. I almost didn't look at it. I told myself it could wait, but something made me pick it up, the way you sometimes reach for a thing before your brain has decided to. And there it was, sitting at the top of my inbox with the subject line, Workforce Restructuring Immediate Effect. My name was in the first sentence. After that, I stopped reading. I set the phone face down on the table. I finished my coffee. I watched a robin land on the fence post near the garden my wife had planted 3 summers ago, the one she still tends every weekend, even though she says it's more work than it's worth. I sat there for a long time. Then I picked the phone back up and read the whole thing. 19 years. That's what they were restructuring away from the organization. 19 years of my life, delivered in 4 paragraphs at 6:23 inches the morning by a man who had been in the building for 11 months. His name was the new CFO. He'd come in from a consulting firm out of Atlanta, brought in by the board to modernize the financial infrastructure of a company that had been running just fine for 2 decades. He wore a lot of Navy suits. He said things like optimize and streamline and right size in meetings where the rest of us sat very still and tried not to make eye contact with each other. He had never once asked me what I did or how any of it worked. The email said my position was being eliminated as part of a broader initiative to consolidate technical operations. It said my last official day would be Friday. It said HR would be in touch regarding the separation agreement and that I should return my badge and equipment to the front desk by end of business Thursday. It did not say thank you. It did not say anything about 19 years. I called my wife from the kitchen table. She was already up, getting our youngest ready for school. I could hear the familiar morning chaos in the background, the cereal bowls, the backpack zipper, the low-grade negotiation about whether a jacket was necessary. When she heard my voice, she went quiet, stepped somewhere private, and listened while I told her. When I finished, she said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" That's the thing about her. She doesn't panic, she doesn't catastrophize, she just asks what you want to do. I told her I didn't know yet, but I did know one thing, and it had been sitting at the back of my mind from the moment I read that email, quiet and patient like something waiting for the right moment to speak. The new CFO had made a decision. He'd made it without reading anything carefully, without understanding what he was actually dealing with, and without knowing about a folder on my home server labeled Pre-Employment Archive 2006. Let me go back to the beginning, because this part matters. I built the core logistics engine that the company runs on. Not metaphorically, I mean I actually wrote it, line by line. During a period in my life when I was between jobs and had nothing but time and a second-hand laptop and a problem I couldn't stop thinking about. The problem was supply chain routing. Specifically, the way mid-sized distribution companies were hemorrhaging money on last-mile inefficiencies that nobody had bothered to model correctly. I'd spent 6 years in operations before that, and I'd watched the same expensive mistakes repeat themselves in every building I'd ever worked in. And at some point I decided to stop complaining about it and build something better. My father used to say that most people see a broken thing and wait for someone else to fix it. He said the difference between the people who build things and the people who watch things get built is about 3 seconds of deciding. He wasn't an engineer. He drove a delivery truck for 31 years. But he understood work, and he understood what it meant to put something real into the world. I spent 14 months on that system. I worked on it at night after my kids went to sleep, on weekends. During the 2 weeks I was between interviews and running low on savings. I used my own equipment. I paid for my own software licenses. I documented every version in a private repository with timestamps going back to the first commit in April of 2006. When I was hired by the company in August of that year, I brought the system with me as part of my pitch. I showed them what it could do. I told them I'd built it independently and that I was prepared to license it to them as part of my employment arrangement. The founder, a man I genuinely respected, someone who had started the business out of a warehouse with 12 employees and a fax machine, understood immediately what he was looking at. We worked out an agreement. It was written into my contract. I would be the system architect. I would continue developing the platform and the licensing terms for the underlying engine. I was 29 years old. My father had told me to always protect what you build before you hand it to someone else. He said it twice, which was unusual for him, and I didn't forget it. The system worked, better than anyone expected, if I'm being honest. Within 2 years, the company's distribution costs were down 18%. Within 5, we were running operations that competitors were trying to reverse engineer from the outside. The founder kept promoting me. I kept building. By the time I was in my mid-40s, I had a team of 11 people, a title that used the word principal, and a quiet, comfortable sense that the work I was doing actually mattered. Then the founder retired. His son took over for about 18 months, and that was its own kind of difficult, but that's a different story. After that, the board brought in an outside CEO, and things shifted again. And then the new CFO arrived, and somewhere in all of that, the institutional memory of how things actually worked started thinning out. The people who had been there in the early days, who knew the history, who remembered the contracts and the handshakes and the reasons behind decisions, they retired, or they left, or they moved into roles where they weren't in the room anymore. By the time the new CFO sent that email at 6:23 on a Monday morning, I was possibly the only person left in the building who had read my own contract addendum. I spent that Monday at home. My wife took the day off work and we went for a long walk, the kind we used to take before the kids came along, when we had nothing but time and each other. We talked about money, which was fine, we'd been careful. We talked about what I might do next. We talked about the kids. At one point she took my hand and didn't say anything, and I thought about my father, who died 3 years ago, but whose voice I still hear in my head, with a regularity that I've stopped being surprised by. He would have said, "Don't get emotional. Get organized." Tuesday morning, I called an attorney. Not just any attorney, I called a woman I'd met through a mutual friend, someone who specialized in intellectual property and had spent 20 years doing nothing but untangling the ownership questions that companies and employees get into when nobody read the paperwork carefully enough. I told her my situation. I told her about the licensing addendum. She asked me to send her every document I had, including the original time-stamped repository records going back to 2006. She called me back Thursday afternoon. Her voice had a particular quality to it, not excited, but precise, the way someone sounds when they've found something that confirms exactly what they suspected. She said, "Your pre-employment documentation is airtight. Versions 0.7 through 1.2 of the core engine were all committed before your hire date. The addendum in your employment contract acknowledges independent origin and specifies licensing terms that the company agreed to in writing." She paused. "There's also a renewal clause in the addendum. Section 9, paragraph 4. The licensing agreement was set for automatic renewal on a 5-year cycle unless both parties provided written notice of termination at least 90 days in advance." I hadn't thought about Section 9 inches a long time. I asked her what she was saying. "I'm saying," she said carefully, "that when they terminated your employment, they may have inadvertently triggered something they didn't intend to. The termination email didn't include any reference to the licensing agreement. It didn't address the addendum at all, which means, depending on how you want to approach this, the licensing arrangement may now exist in a state that's very uncomfortable for them." I sat with that for a moment. "How uncomfortable?" I asked. "Their entire operational platform runs on the engine you built before you were their employee," she said. "If the licensing terms are no longer being honored, and terminating the architect without addressing the licensing agreement could be interpreted as a breach, then their right to continue using that system is, at minimum, an open question." I asked her what she would recommend. She said, "Let me send them a letter first. Just a letter. We inform them that you've retained counsel, that you're reviewing the terms of your separation, and that you'd like to schedule a call to discuss the outstanding contractual matters before you sign anything." She paused again. "Sometimes that's enough for people to start reading what they should have read a long time ago." The letter went out Friday, the same day my badge and equipment were supposed to be at the front desk. I dropped those off in the morning, said goodbye to the colleagues I'd worked with for nearly 2 decades, tried to keep it together in the parking lot afterward, and mostly succeeded. By Monday of the following week, I had a call request from the company's general counsel. I want to be careful here about what I say and how I say it, because some of this is still under a confidentiality agreement that I'm not going to violate. What I can tell you is that the call lasted almost 2 hours. What I can tell you is that the general counsel's voice had that same tight, controlled quality that people get when they're trying very hard not to sound alarmed. What I can tell you is that at one point, about 40 minutes in, she asked me to hold for a moment, and when she came back, she said, "I need to loop in someone else." And then there were 2 other voices on the call, and one of them was asking questions that told me, clearly, that this was the first time anyone in that room had actually looked at my employment contract addendum. What I can also tell you is that nobody mentioned the new CFO by name for the entire 2 hours. Not once. The part that took the longest to resolve wasn't the money, though the money was significant. It was the operational question. Because my attorney had been right. The platform the company ran on, the system that processed hundreds of thousands of routing decisions every single day, the infrastructure that their clients depended on, and that their entire revenue model was built around all of it, traced back to an engine that I had built on my own time, on my own equipment, before I ever set foot in their building. And the licensing terms for that engine were now the subject of a legal question that nobody in the company had anticipated when the new CFO decided to streamline the workforce at 6:23 on a Monday morning. I'll tell you the moment it really hit me. It was about 3 weeks after the termination, and I was in my home office reviewing documents with my attorney on a video call when she mentioned, almost in passing, that the company had a pending partnership deal with a logistics firm out of Dallas, a deal that had apparently been in negotiation for several months, and that was significant enough that the board had been briefed on it. She'd learned about it through the discovery process. She said the deal was worth approximately $380 million. She said the Dallas firm's due diligence team had recently flagged a question about the provenance of the company's core technology. She said the question was specifically about whether the ownership of the underlying engine was clean. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just sat there in my home office, looking out the window at my wife's garden, thinking about my father and the 14 months I spent building something real, and the 2 times he told me to protect what you build before you hand it to someone else. I asked my attorney what happened to the deal. She said, "It's on hold." The resolution took several more months, and I'm not going to walk through all of it because most of it was attorneys talking to attorneys in language designed to leave as little on the record as possible. What I will tell you is that the outcome was fair, more than fair, in ways that I'm still sometimes surprised by when I think about it. The licensing agreement was restructured. My original work was formally recognized and compensated accordingly. The terms were documented in a way that left no ambiguity for anyone who might read the paperwork 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. The new CFO left the company about 4 months after my termination. I don't know the exact circumstances and I didn't ask. I heard about it through someone I still talk to who's still there, and when she told me I didn't feel the way I thought I might feel. I didn't feel satisfied or vindicated or anything dramatic. I mostly felt tired and a little sad, and I thought again about my father. He would have said that none of this was about the CFO. He would have said the CFO was just the match, not the fire. The fire was something that had been there for a long time, the assumption that the people who build things don't know what they built, or don't know what it's worth, or won't do anything about it when someone takes it from them. He would have said that assumption is extremely common and extremely expensive, and that the people who hold it are usually the last ones to understand why everything went wrong. I don't think he would have said it with any pleasure. That's the thing about him that I've been trying to hold on to. He wasn't someone who enjoyed other people's failures. He just believed very strongly that the world has a way of correcting for carelessness, and that the correction is not always gentle. Here's the thing I want you to take from this, because I've been thinking about how to say it for a long time. I was almost the person who let this go. I want you to know that. That first morning, sitting at the kitchen table with the phone face down and the coffee going cold, there was a version of me that was going to sign the separation agreement, take whatever they offered, and move on. Because I was tired. Because 19 years is a long time to fight anything. Because I am not, by nature, a person who goes looking for conflict. But my father sat at a kitchen table once too. He'd worked at the same freight company for 22 years, and they changed ownership, and the new management found a technicality in his seniority classification and used it to cut his pension by almost a third. He had documentation showing the classification was wrong. He had a union rep who told him he had a case, and he sat at the kitchen table and told my mother he didn't want the trouble. He regretted it for the rest of his life. Not loudly, he wasn't loud about things, but I knew, and a few years before he died. During one of those conversations that fathers and sons have when time starts to feel less like something you have and more like something you're spending, he told me directly. He said he'd let them take something that was his because he was tired and he didn't want the fight, and that it was the one decision in his adult life he would make differently if he could. He wasn't talking about the money. He was talking about what it means to stand behind the thing you built. I don't think I'm a hero in this story. I want to be clear about that. I had advantages that a lot of people don't have. I had documentation. I had the foresight of a 29-year-old who listened to his father. I had the financial stability to wait. I had a good attorney. I know that most people in a situation like mine don't have all of those things, and the outcome is different when you don't. That's real, and it matters, and I think about it. But I also think about the fact that every person who builds something, every engineer who writes code on their own time, every designer who develops a system before they're hired, every person who shows up to a new job carrying something they made has a right to know what they built and to protect it. Not after the fact. Not when you're already sitting at the kitchen table reading a termination email at 6:23 inches the morning. Before you sign anything, before you hand anything over, before you trust anyone else to remember it for you. My father drove a truck for 31 years. He wasn't an engineer, but the thing he taught me about work is the most important professional lesson I've ever received, and it has nothing to do with software or patents or licensing addendums. It's just this: the people who take things from you are counting on you to believe that what you built isn't worth the trouble. Your job is to know with absolute certainty that it is. My wife asked me once, a few months after everything settled, whether I was glad it had happened the way it did. Whether I was glad about any of it. I told her I wasn't glad. I told her I would have preferred 19 quiet years and a proper retirement, and none of the attorneys and none of the depositions and none of the days I spent wondering if I'd made the right call. I would have preferred to keep doing the work I loved, in a building where people knew what I did and why it mattered, for a few more years and then walk out on my own terms. But I was glad I hadn't signed the separation agreement. I was glad I'd called the attorney. I was glad that somewhere in my home office, in a folder I hadn't thought about in years, there were timestamps going back to April of 2006 that told a story clearly and completely and without any ambiguity at all. And I was glad that when I was 29 years old and scared and running low on money and trying to build something I believed in, I had a father who told me twice, which was unusual for him to protect what I built before I handed it to someone else. He was right about that. He was right about most things. I still wake up at 5:30. I still have coffee before the rest of the house is awake. The robin is back on the fence post this spring. Or maybe it's a different robin, I can never tell. My wife's garden came up better this year than last. My youngest asked me last week what I'm working on now, and I told her I'm building something new. And she asked if I was going to patent it, and I laughed out loud for the first time in what felt like a long time. I told her yes, absolutely yes. And I told her if she ever builds anything at all, with her hands or her mind or her time to document it from day one, date everything, keep her own copies, and never let anyone convince her that protecting what she built is more trouble than it's worth. She's 14. She looked at me the way 14-year-olds look at their fathers when they think you're being a little much. But she was listening. I could tell.